Morning, everyone, and welcome uh, everyone to this very important session on better managing public finances in a new global era. Um, we I think there's some other session going on. Okay. Um, let me first talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about, I think. Uh, Fiscal transparency is an issue which is getting increasing importance both in India and the rest of the world, um, because given how the fiscal structure as well as situation has been changing in the world in the last 20 years or so, this issue has become much more important. And therefore, in India, certainly in particular, uh, the whole issue encompasses very important for us to be able to understand the fiscal numbers, what's going on both in revenue and expenditure, and in the composition of expenditure and the composition of revenue, how accurate they are, how regular they are, and also it may be the case that a lot of the data are actually available somewhere in the system. You just have to find it. And it may also be that governments often, sometimes, I was going to say often, let me say, cover myself, say sometimes, deliberately put it somewhere so one can say it's not available, but it's designed so that people can't actually look at it. So that's also the issue of how accessible government financial data, financial reports are. And this is important because uh, as the fiscal situation has become difficult across the world, um, and I would say now, particularly in advanced economies, much more so now in most emerging markets and developing economies, that it's very important that information is available so that governments can make economic choices in a competent manner, and also so that the public can evaluate what choices they make based on the information available. Um, a lot of this came into focus after the 2008-9, what I always call the North Atlantic financial crisis, others called global financial crisis. The reason for that being that if you actually examine what happened in 2008-9, to my knowledge, and Anoop, you may correct me, as you usually do, um, that to my knowledge, not one financial institution failed in Asia, Africa, or Latin America. So this was truly a North Atlantic financial crisis. But the world being Western oriented, when something happens in the West, it's global. When something happens in Asia, it's an Asian financial crisis in 1997. But that's totally by the way, except to say that a lot of the impetus for transparency started in 2008. And of course, IMF was a bit late, with apologies to Anoop, as always. Um, that it finally did figure out by 2012, and that was because I joined the board in October 2012. So they just figured out that there was a problem. And so they conducted a review of fiscal transparency weaknesses at that time and came out fiscal transparency code in 2014. And it was built on 4 pillars. The first, on fiscal reporting, as I just talked about, fiscal forecasting. That is, it's also important for governments to communicate on the expectations for the future while knowing that the future never corresponds to what you think is going to be. But fiscal forecasting is important. The second pillar, also fiscal risk analysis and management. And finally, resource revenue management. So again, what you want to do in terms of expenditure depends on how well you do the management of resources so revenue resources for revenue. So the in so this the fiscal IMF fiscal transparency code came out in 2014, and the CSEP team led by the redoubtable Mr. Anoop Singh, I'll say a little bit more about him in a second, has been leading it. And the team has evaluated has evaluated how transparent India's budgets and financial accounts truly are, including of state governments. And this is very critical and crucial because detailed, trustworthy fiscal information will help us to understand whether India is making the best use of its public resources. A big issue that is constantly there in all governments, and certainly in India, is the trade-off between spending for investment, which provides future returns, and economic growth, of course, future productivity, and spending on subsidies and welfare to cater to the current needs of the population. And obviously, big trade-off is indeed between short-term subsidies and long-term investments. And one thing that I would like to say here is that, like many recommendations by economists, there are always lots of unintended consequences of what economists' favorite things are. And one of them is the direct cash benefit transfer. That it is sound economics to say that, look, it's makes much more sense, it's much more rational to give people money, let them decide what they want to do with the money, as opposed to subsidies, etc., in kind. But one unintended consequence of this is, and especially now with the Jan Dhan combination, of that it has become so easy to transfer money just at a drop of pushing a button. That you don't, in earlier days, when you do subsidies by in terms of physical subsidies, i.e., giving food or whatever it is, that involves processes, government action, etc., etc. And so it's much more difficult to deliver. And therefore, actually, it's slower in the expenditure of government resources. Now, with the new technology, etc., and the new ideology, in some sense, started by economists, it's become so easy to do fiscal transfers that everyone, not just India, in the world, is very happy pushing the button. And so the pressure to give subsidies, fiscal subsidies, has risen tremendously. And we can see that in all elections, whether national elections or state elections, every party, without exception, is essentially rooting for more and more money to be given away, and essentially at the cost of investment for the future. So this is a very important study. I hope they continue doing it. And so let me now introduce our distinguished guests. First, let me welcome Mr. Suman Bery, Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, who has graced us with his presence. He declined to sit there, so that he really obviously wants to listen to Anoop and our young presenters. So let me just introduce Anoop Singh. I think everyone knows, but his biggest achievement is that he's now a distinguished fellow at CSEP in his career. He was a member of the 15th Finance Commission in India. And prior to that, he was in the IMF for most of his life since he was born. And so he was the longest serving staff member of the IMF, because when he retired, he was still very young. But he served for what, 40 years, Anoop?
10 years. I'm 40 now.
Okay. So, but in the rest of the world, he's been known as the Scars of Argentina. So whenever he goes to Argentina, he has to wear three bulletproof vests. He has to go in an armored car, and with 4 members of the police escort around him. So in terms of fiscal transparency activity, etc., Anoop has worked on the 2 out of the 3 countries which have had the most IMF programs. That is Argentina, Philippines is number 3, I think. Argentina is number 1. Pakistan is number 2. He's even been on a mission to Pakistan. So that shows that no one listens to him. because if they listen to him and all these IMF programs, they would keep having fiscal crises. So I hope your record improves in India, Anup, through this paper. And I'm sure it will, because he has very able researchers working with him. Radha Malani, on the right over there, who is a research analyst, and she has a master's in public policy from LK by school in the National University of Singapore, and Shruti Gupta, who has a master's from Ashoka University. So I hope that their work will help you so that you're more influential here in actual impact than you have been in Argentina, Philippines. We worked together in the Philippines, actually. I from the World Bank and he from the IMF in the mid-1980s. Of course, we were much more effective from the World Bank side. And there were more structural reforms, and the growth went up, etc. Also, let me welcome Mr. Subodh Mathur, very nice of you, to grace this occasion. Former Additional Controller General of Accounts. He was a member of the Indian Civil Account Service and has more than 34 years, 35 years experience in public finance. In his last assignment, he managed the financial management system, the FMS-IS system, Government of India, which is exactly what we're all talking about, public finance management system. And online, we are very lucky to have Mr. Amar Patnaik. He is a former member of parliament. I thought you were just hiding your face from us. Former members of parliament are not known to be shy. So former member of parliament, Rajya Sabha from Odisha. He also was in the Indian Civil Service and Indian Civil Services as an Indian IA and AS officer under the CAG. So my job is over now. Anoop, it's all yours. You're the chair.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for saying what you said. I think you heard from him.
I took permission to say what I said about
no,
it.
No,
so.
That I'm not sure. The basic point, now we have a great team, and I'm very glad Amar is here. And of course, all of you are here. So we're going to hear from our team first. So I'll be brief. Now, the purpose of having this meeting is to focus on what they call, and I call, data gaps. Now, the issue is, what are data gaps? And why is this important now? Well, as Rakesh has said, I believe that we're going through a historical change in our global financial and trade relationship. I think we are now at a stage where trade is probably no longer going to be the engine of growth globally. It's not only happening now because of Trump, it actually started 10 years ago and is persisted. Now, the reason this is important is many countries, especially the advanced countries, including the US, realizing there's going to be a shift in the engine of growth from trade, they're shifting to fiscal policy as being the primary engine of growth. Now, the problem with that is this is an inopportune time to shift. Why? Because we are already near another debt crisis globally. And why? All these years we had assumed that the problem of the debt crisis comes from emerging markets. No, that's not the case. Today, the problem in there is run from the principal global players. If you look at the data properly, and properly is important because properly means there are data gaps. If you look at the data properly, you probably find that the US and China separately have a debt ratio properly measured of the general government of around 120% of GDP. Now, the issue is we're at the stage where we're already having a close to a debt crisis. How are we going to shift to fiscal policy? And also, as Rakesh said, we've had these debt crises in the last 30 years. After each one, debt has been restructured or met. So why are we again at a stage where debt is a problem, which makes it very difficult to make fiscal policy the engine of growth? And the reason why is why we're here today. The reason is that globally, advanced countries, emerging markets have tried to not disclose what they are spending on, how they are spending, how it's being financed, and what is the debt. Now, at the extreme, you might say Germany, all these years, has been the hawk on fiscal stability and having no debt. Germany is among the countries that have used extra budgetary accounts not to disclose what the debt is. This has been the case globally, and this is because there are data gaps. Now, we've looked at this from India's point of view, and the team explained what they have found in our own data gaps. But the issue is, why do these data gaps exist? That's the most important question. And secondly, if they can be closed and made public, we can then understand what we are spending on. We can understand how we are financing it. We can understand that if fiscal policy is going to be the engine of growth, where can we cut? Should we cut subsidies in India? Should we raise investment? Now, I must say one thing, having said this, there's been a problem in India where the data is difficult to assess. But let me just say at the start that the finance secretary in India, until recently, who was deaf, he was the one person, I would say in recent years, who brought this issue to in India and has acted in order to try to close as much as data gaps with the states as he could and also at the center. So the issue is very important. I'm going to stop at this point. Why don't you all tell us what are India's data gaps, why it's important, and then we hear from Amar. Amar, by the way, has been speaking on these issues publicly for many years, and he also comes from a state, Odisha, although he's not been in the government, I don't think. You must remember, of all the states in India, Odisha is probably the only state that has followed consistent, transparent reporting of fiscal accounts. Anyway, let me stop and you all take over.
I see that the USDM, also the US nominated DMD of the IMF, gave a statement giving on the US fiscal issues yesterday. Would that be the first time that IMF DMD spoken about US fiscal issues, you think?
No. We have a press conference after every Article 4 every year.
Yeah. No, but would she have said something about fisc being very dangerous in the US?
Well,
that's my question.
That's good. But we've said this on China.
No, I know, but on the US. On the US.
So the issue now where debt is concerned is not the problem of emerging markets. Does someone have the chart 2, which I'd ask you to put up? If you put up the chart number 2, what this will tell you is these shades are the extent to which debt has been hidden and not shown because of contingent liabilities, unreported extra budgetary borrowing, and other sources. So in all countries, what their debt problem today is much greater than what people thought. Okay, please take over.
Thank you for presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This seminar is an effort to bring urgent public attention to the need for good quality data to improve India's fiscal governance and accountability. Our team at CSEP has deeply studied the data gaps affecting our budgets and finance accounts. Through this presentation, Shruti and I will share the most crucial of these. The central government has recently attempted to bring greater transparency to its public finances. The introduction of the statement of off-budget borrowings in the union's budgets since 2019 and the release of consolidated data on state-reported off-budget borrowings in 2023 signal progress in this direction. These reforms must now extend to the state level, as states account for nearly 2/3 of general government spending. Subsidy spending and capital spending, therefore, two very large and hotly debated categories of public expenditure, have been the key focus areas of our research. We do this by assessing India's alignment to international reporting standards such as those by the IMF and the World Bank. This builds on India's commitments to the G20 Data Gaps Initiative. Understanding where public money flows is crucial for credible public finance management. Our research highlights 3 key data gaps which impede this. First, the lack of a standard and internationally aligned definition of subsidy and capital spending. In the case of subsidy spending, states have significant leeway in determining whether to include or exclude categories such as tax rebates, freebies, or implicit subsidies in the calculation of subsidy spending. In capital spending's case, although the IMF defines capital spending as net acquisition of non-financial assets, in India, financial assets such as loans, equity, and even debt repayment are included in the calculation of capital spending. A second issue concerns off-budget means to finance subsidy expenditure and capex while bypassing public scrutiny. In many cases, states report only a fraction of their annual subsidy expenditure. This is because extra budgetary resources raised by state PSEs managing food and power subsidies remain hidden and unreported. Finally, the Indian government follows cash-based accounting as opposed to accrual accounting, which enables governments to defer payments to the future and obscure their true costs in any given fiscal year. These three challenges further generate 6 primary data gaps. First, abrupt changes in accounting practices without adequate disclosures have led to unreliable time series comparisons. For instance, under recoveries to oil marketing companies was included in the union's calculation of fuel subsidy until fiscal year 15. However, this was excluded in fiscal year 23. Next, as discussed before, many subsidies are omitted due to their ambiguous classification and off-budget financing. CAG has assessed that extra budgetary resources have been raised in place of fertilizer subsidy payments. However, these have not been reflected in the union's fertilizer subsidy bill. Next, fragmented data disallows meaningful center-state and interstate analysis. An example of this is the cooking oil subsidy, sometimes accounted as a food subsidy by some states, and other states accounted as a subsidy for women's development. Fourth, the dearth of publicly available detailed data points for deeper analysis is a major hindrance to assess the quality of public spending. For instance, although the CAG mentioned that the Bharatmala Pariyojana laid down some output parameters, there was no mechanism laid out for their measurement and reporting. Fifth, instances of states misreporting revenue expenditure or grants and aids as capex and vice versa are plenty. In FY23, Maharashtra alone misreported grants and aids worth over 3,000 crore as capital spending. Finally, the CAG has also highlighted poor planning, delayed approvals, fund underutilization, and weak project management of infrastructure projects at the state level. An example is that of the Dwarka Expressway, in which the cost of construction increased from rupees 257 crore per kilometer as against an approved cost of rupees 18 crores. Shruti will now explain the extent to which these data gaps create discrepancies between what is reported and what actual spending looks like.
Thanks, Radha. So the next few slides will show how these data gaps will translate into under and overstatement of parameters like debt, subsidy spending, and capital spending. So this graph shows the extent of effect which off-budget borrowings had on debt to GSDP ratios of states. We did this exercise in an earlier paper. The red bars show the reported debt to GSDP ratios by select states, and the black bars show what happens to these ratios once we add off-budget borrowings. We see in the graph on the left that in 2021, Andhra Pradesh off-budget debt ratios, they shot up by almost 10% once off-budget borrowings were added. So such borrowings are used for multiple purposes, including but not limited to subsidies and capital expenditure. Moving on, this graph shows the reported capital spending of the union as a percentage of its GDP in blue color. So what happens is this comprises of both financial and non-financial transactions, but the latter does not lead to direct asset creation. So to arrive at a fair estimate, we deduct from this the equity infusion made into PSEs by the government and all the loans and advances made by the union government, say to PSEs to state governments. For example, recently the center has provided a 50-year interest-free loan to state governments. But however, this expenditure should be recorded as capital spending of the states when it is incurred on creation of non-financial assets and should not be reflected as center's capital spending. We have a similar story with states. As mentioned, this graph shows capital spending by 6 states. For others, either the data was not available for all the financial transactions or for all the for across the years, which in itself is a data gap. So the blue line shows the capital spending as reported by these states. So to arrive at adjusted figures, apart from loan and equity, we also deduct misclassifications, which are when revenue expenditure is misclassified as capital expenditure or vice versa. So to give an example, sometimes revenue items like repairs, they are added in capital expenditure by the state governments. So after adjusting for all of that, we see that there's almost a 2% gap between the adjusted and the reported in the latest year. So moving our focus to subsidies, the graph shows reported versus adjusted subsidy spending of the union government as a percentage of its GDP. Again, the blue shows the reported subsidy and the red line shows the adjusted numbers that we arrived at. So to arrive at the adjusted numbers, we include in the reported subsidy crucial elements like special securities issued in lieu of cash to oil marketing companies, to FCI fertilizer companies. We also include PLIs, production linked incentives, which offer financial incentives to certain sectors. And we also include loans made to PSCs by the government, for which the government is liable. This graph shows a similar story for states, how their subsidy burden is higher. So this graph shows the subsidy spending of on food and power by the 6 states, as mentioned before. We take only food and power because these are the 2 items on which states spend almost entirely in terms of subsidies. We see that the adjusted figures are much higher, the red line, than the reported ones. So finally, moving on to some key recommendations. Since these highlight pervasive data gaps in India's public finance, these recommendations we believe should be acted upon. First is uniform classification of capex and subsidies across center and states, along with definitions possibly under a new public finance management law. Lastly, government expenditure incurred on through PSCs, through special purpose vehicles, and through EBRs must be consolidated to get one single figure for capex and subsidies. This practice should also be introduced across all financial accounting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to Amar, because he's online and I hope he can see us. We can see you now. Why don't you speak first? Then we ask Subodh to speak. And thank you. Can you hear us? Can you check if you can hear?
He's on mute.
Oh, you may be on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Anoop Singh and Professor Rakesh Mohan. Thank you so much for this initial introductory lines on the need for transparency. Honestly speaking, this is I think after a long gap that I'm speaking on public finance. Otherwise, that used to be my bread and butter as the principal accountant general of Orissa. I would probably like to say that in 2012, when I took over the charge of principal accountant general in Orissa and was trying to clean up the reporting of the state accounts, many of these issues had actually come up, and I have seen this also in several states where I was the accountant general. You spoke about Kerala. I was the principal AG there. I've seen what happens in Sikkim. I've seen what happens in West Bengal too. And when I was a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance for about 5 years, one had seen the quality and reporting of accounts of the central government and, of course, also of the budget. I largely agree with the research that your researchers have done. There are a couple of things that I thought I would highlight, which might actually take your research forward. The first thing I would like to point out is the RBI's definition of freebies and subsidies. They take out a report, and in that definition, they say that it defines as public welfare measures provided free of charge. That's very simple definition, looks very impressive. But I had written a piece on this in the Economic Times that, RBI's definition, which looks very simple and maybe uniform, and they do this compilation for all the states and make observations. It says that free electricity, free transportation, and some other categories as freebies or non-merit subsidies. But it says PDS, employment generation as public merit goods. But what about capitalization of banks, loans given to cooperatives? Now, these things are being classified by RBI as merit public goods or whatever. They are not being treated as subsidies. So I write there that this is probably not right, and therefore, in fact, loan waivers through one-time settlement schemes, across the board tax concessions to corporate sector. How do you classify them? So I think one has to really spend time and get consensus on this definition. My view is that if you make a value neutral accounting definition of subsidies, that would probably muster support across the board. Otherwise, the moment you put value into it, in the sense, depending on, I would like to say, political interpretation of that value, then it creates problems. So whether we can arrive at that is something that you have to, we can think about. What about seed capital given to MSMEs under various schemes, startups? Now there is a scheme. Every outgo from Government of India will have to be through a scheme. There are some kind of an argument which says that if it is not through a scheme, then it would be a non-merit kind of a subsidy, and if it is through a scheme, then it would be acceptable. So I think we shouldn't get into this. If we can do a value neutral definition of subsidy and just apply the law there or the principles there, I think that would do us good. The second point is on the question of context. You talked about Orissa. Orissa is a revenue surplus state, and 50,000 crores was, I think, 2023-24, 48,000 crores was the revenue surplus. And that has come because of non-tax revenues. You must have done the analysis to the mining auction of the mines. And that may be the situation in 2 or 3 more states, where they probably, if they go for auction, they would also arrive. They will get this kind of figures for revenue surplus. But what is important is the context. Now, if in Orissa, 40% of your population, 23% or 24% scheduled tribes, compared to the national average of 15%. And then the scheduled caste is another 15%, which takes to 39%. I think the state will be in its right, or I think would be considered as probably doing its job if it extends more number of subsidies to address the lower quality of life of this section of people. Now, you can't, some other state cannot say that, this is, which is not in similarly placed population or demographic composition, can say that, no, this is a non-merit subsidy. So in order to, bring this distinction, context is important. And how do you build that context into this definition would be a challenge. On the issue of state finances, the CAG comes out with a state finance report, just like the central government you have a state finance report on their accounts. One is the budgetary provision, and the other one is the actual expenditure. I was talking to Professor Singh the other day. There are other instruments or other methods in which the actual expenditure, whether it is revenue or capital, can be overstated. So what you do is that you transfer certain amount of money to public accounts, and public accounts they do not close to account, that is, they are non-lapsable, and they are available in the subsequent year also for spending. So if you take the figure, how big is the figure of balances under the public deposit account or other kind of deposits in public accounts, and from which revenue or capital expenditure head this was taken, because our the accounting rules for the accountant general, where the classification takes place, it doesn't suggest or prescribe a reduction in expenditure at the end of the year if you transfer something to the public accounts. So what happens is that even if you have really spent 10 rupees, because your budgetary provision is 20 rupees, therefore the balance 10, in order not to let it lapse, you transfer it to public deposits. Many states do it. And then it is available for use in the subsequent year. So in that year, what you are showing is actually the overstatement of expenditure on all accounts. This was the point which I had very strongly brought out during my tenure in West Bengal. And therefore, they had put in some kind of mechanism, CAG at that time had prescribed. I do not know whether it has been followed. I think here, the accounting rules, there is a prescription, no? Accounting rules for accountant general. I think CAG has that. The CGA may be also following that particular classification, receipt and payment rules, and all this probably have to be looked at. The another point relating to up budget borrowing. I have spoken in Parliament on this. That during the time when I joined the Parliament in 19, and I had seen that the food subsidy, a large chunk of it was actually being shown below the budget, and also below the finance accounts. But you must, I went and told the finance minister that what she did during the COVID period, when everything was under stress and your fiscal deficit was really, I think it was 23%, 9%, she brought many of those up budget things into the main budget and has shown it as revenue expenditure. It's a real creditable thing which she did, which I remember in my 25 years in government and in CAG, and looking at accounts, right from day one, that this used to be a constant worry for all of us. We used to write in audit reports year after year that please reduce our budget borrowings, bring them in. She did that. If she could do it, I'm sure the states could actually do it. Many states, you talked about Andhra Pradesh. I know the story because in the parliament it was spoken about that the Beverage Corporation of India took loans for future cash flows that would come, and then it was state government was a guarantee to it. And in our finance account, since it is not a accrual accounting system, you just have a statement which is based on information provided by the state government. Many times this information is not provided. So that leads to a number of, I think, understatement of expenditure, understatement of liabilities, and understatement of, guarantees, which eventually the state has to, liquidate in case if it is required to do so, or honor it in case it's required to do so. The point relating to capital expenditure, if you look at the budget, of course, in the last 5-6 years, the trajectory has been to increase the capital expenditure, and the transfer to the states, how they present it in the budget at a glance. I don't think they take it as a capital expenditure of the central government. I think you probably could check. They made this presentation. I think it is still shown as a transfer because it cannot be shown as a capital expenditure in central government accounts. It must be putting into the capital side on the capital receipt on the state side. What, however, the government of India is doing and has constantly done in the last 3 budgets I spoke in the parliament, they're saying our capital expenditure is this, but the transfer to the states is this. Therefore, effective capital expenditure is this, which is actually probably not getting into accounts, but it makes good optics. So this is another thing that is happening. One more thing I wanted to mention is that the transfers that are taking place to the local bodies, which is increasing over a period of time, mainly because of the recommendations of the successive finance commissions, rightly so. But the accounting of the capital revenue aspects of expenditure of these transfers is, I think, I would say, because I used to be the auditor there as well, is extremely shoddy and extremely non-transparent. Right from the word go, because the money that comes from the state budget, it is transferred to a head called 8448, I think, in public accounts, if I remember correctly. You can check. So 8448 is a deposit to local funds. So it is in block. The capital expenditure for creating capital assets at the local government level, from, let's say, police, from health, from education, all will go to this head of account. And after that, the transfers will go to the respective NSEs, municipalities, corporations, who are supposed to maintain the accounts properly and then probably get it audited. Now, you see, initially itself, the confusion remains, and this results in, I think, proper accounting of capital assets, capital expenditure and linked assets not happening in our country. The accrual accounting would have really helped us to actually account for many of these things. But you know that I think for the last 10, 12 years, we have been struggling with this. I really do not know. You know, I'm sure you would be knowing that if any state is asked, what is the capital asset created over a period of time and linked it to the total expenditure that has been released for the same, I'm sure I can confidently say that across the states, this will not match. Because the only thing that is required to be maintained is an asset register. And once it is not related to an accounting entry, what happens is that if someone remembers, he writes it. If someone doesn't remember, someone writes it. One auditor goes and checks the assets in a particular year. It is always a sample check. It is not a 100% check. So you do not really have a total picture of how much money has been given for capital expenditure and what were the projected assets that were supposed to be created. Because depending on that, you will obviously provide for maintenance of that asset. And that is why I don't remember, one of the finance commissions really wanted to make an assessment of this so that a maintenance expenditure could be given. And that exercise could not be completed. This is something which probably also needs your look, because I think your investigation, because that will probably increase the transparency. On the debt side, you mentioned correctly that there is some it's not in alignment with the international accounting standards, because loans and given is actually taken as capital spending. Really, by no stretch of imagination, this could be happening. So that is a suggestion. But the Indian accounting standards, which were being framed, again, in the finance standing committee on finance, we are pushing for it. But we found that there were not many, takers. Even CAG, I think, there are 4 or 5 standards which have come out, and it has just remained there. It has not really been implemented. One could probably look at that aspect as well. The last point is relating to MSP. That is the minimum support price. Strictly speaking, the food subsidy that you are calculating or that is being shown in the budget is one which is being given the Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Yojana, whatever, 80 crore people multiplied by the issue price, and that is being shown. But the amount that is given for procurement operations is actually, if you look at it, it's almost like a production subsidy. No one calls it so. So it is a minimum support price and administered price. And that is being given even though the market price is less. Market price, not necessarily the price of at which PMG, Prime Minister's Garib Annakal Yojana is being given. Now that is actually a subsidy which is being given, and the Food Corporation of India bears it. It is obviously being given to the FCI from the national budget, but many of the states are also doing the procurement operation to fit their PDS. So even in the Standing Committee on Finance one, I tried to assess, and I really didn't get these figures very accurately and easily. So I think when I raised a lot of concerns, I completely agree with the concerns raised there, but I'm going to a granularity of it. And unfortunately, even though we are in an age in which big data would actually sharpen our decision making and could actually be very helpful, unlike the times 20 years or 30 years ago when it was so difficult to compile accounts from vouchers. Now that we have a PFMS, I think the granularity, driving towards granularity should be one of our objectives of public finance management, because that would probably give us the handle to address policy much more effectively. I think these are a few points that I wanted to make. Thank you so much.
We look forward to you. Let me just make one point as Subodh starts to speak. In our work, we've been very careful in staying away from value judgments. We are not trying to assess, is subsidies good or bad? We're not trying to assess, is there a better way of doing it? We're simply trying to focus on what are you spending on and how is it being financed? And we're talking only about spending. We're looking at this issue across the public finances, including other spending and also revenues and financing. So the issue is just to be able to understand what you're doing, not make a judgment if that's what you should do. That's something else. Over to you.
Thanks, sir.
You may go there if you wish, or speak from
No,
here.
I'm good. I think Mr. Amar has covered a lot of points. So the first point I would like to make is one of the reasons why we are having a lot of data gaps between what is disclosed by the center and the states is, what we would suggest is we should have a uniform chart of accounts, what the structure of the budget, the structure of the accounts. Currently, the system of the chart of accounts is, it's a multi-level accounts, and it's only up to certain level that the states and the union, they have a commonality, and beyond that, the states are free to have their own structure. Conceptually, it's fine, but essentially, if you want to aggregate, and this is something Mr. Amar also mentioned, that the transfers from the state governments to the third level entities forms a bulk. So essentially, one of the things that the government could take up is having a uniform chart of accounts across the union and the states and the local bodies, with enough flexibility for the states to have their own coding within that structure. That will help in aggregating the figures right from the third level to the states and to the center. So having a uniform chart of accounts across all the levels will be something which will be useful. And this can get embedded. What has been mentioned in the presentation is the lack of a public finance law. I think that is so critical. While the states have their own accounting codes prescribed by the AGs, and the center has got receipt and payment rules and general accounting rules directly derived from the Constitution of India. I think an overall public finance law which embeds the basic definitions and the concepts in that law which will be uniformly applicable to the union and the states, and define things like what is a capital, what is a subsidy, and things like that. I think that will be very, very important. The third thing is, while the paper has focused more on the recording and reporting, as Mr. Rakesh Mohan has also said, the fiscal transparency also involves in the transparency of fiscal budgeting, fiscal reporting, and also the fiscal risk management. I think these are the areas where also some of the things can be embedded in the PFM law, so that we can have a uniformity between the center and the states for better reporting, better decision making, better decisions based on the data. So that's all I have to say, sir. I'll be happy to add as and when we go along.
Right. I think your point of having a PFM law is a very important point. Most countries have it. Now, it's important to remember that we are not trying to say that adopt the standards used by the IMF or the World Bank or any international standards. What we're saying is have a consistent definition and timetable for reporting and audit across the states. Now, if you want to use that process to get a law which is aligned with international standards, that would be good. But the first step is to have a consistency across the states and the center. Now, Suman, you're going to speak to us later on, but you can speak now if you wish or whenever. But you know, what you have done is you've taken a very important step in the NITI. You have produced under your leadership the new Fiscal Health Index. And that Fiscal Health Index tries to do exactly what we're saying, which is to assess the strength or weakness of the states. Now, the issue therefore arises is that may be one vehicle, one instrument through which you could work with the states to ensure consistency of definitions and reporting. But look, before we turn on to you,
I was going to say that.
maybe now or later.
No,
as
I
you-
think that let's have a Q&A.
Okay.
And then, but I do have a hard stop at 1.
Yes, yes, yes. So now, do you want to add to what Amar has said, and do you want to add anything more before we turn over to the?
Start the Q&A.
Okay, so let's hear some questions.
Then they can be answered as they go
Yes,
along.
so
Very quick,
Yes,
specific questions.
yes.
One, on
you go
the
first.
yeah, on the capex of the government, both state governments and central governments, what they report and what is adjusted. Now, is it possible to look at what is reflected in national accounts in terms of public investment and correspondence with what government is saying? That's number one. Number two, just a common accrual accounting a question, which is that there's no, I mean, it's clear that accrual accounting would be much better. A question there is that it also can give rise to greater creativity in reporting. Whereas at least in cash accounting, it's straightforward. It may not be the best thing to do from an economic point of view, but accrual accounting needs a lot of judgments. That's two. Three, the central government loans, I think Mr. Patnaik said that in fact the government, when it gives loans, doesn't account them as capital expenditures. The correct thing obviously is for the states to report that capital expenditure which comes from the loans. So just one clarification on that. Four, on equity infusion to public sector enterprises, right? Presumably it should be seen as capital expenditure when the PSEs spend on capital. Is that correct? And is there any way of monitoring that?
But not at the first step.
Not at the first step, yeah. Just something on Mr. Patnaik talked about the public accounts, that you show the expenditure when it gets transferred to public account. What happens when the public account actually disburses? Is it again shown as expenditure by the government when it goes there? Well, he's already answering, so I can see that. And finally, something small like, say, things like free bus travel for women and so on, which is a good idea, right? Does that show a subsidy anywhere?
That's
Things like that.
So we're trying to stay away if it's a good idea or a bad.
No. I'm
We're
not,
trying
I'm not saying factual.
Where it's
Does that show
where
a
it is
subsidy?
reported, exactly. Do you want to answer some of these before we go ahead to the other? You know all this so well.
Hardly. I'll answer two things. One, sir was asking about the accrual having a creativity. Totally agree with you, sir. The creativity comes especially when we are trying to assess the value of the balance sheet items. So, so that can raise the value of the assets or reduce the value of the liabilities and things like that. So, creativity can take place. Although if the government and especially the PFM law, if they can define what is the methodology of measurement of the assets and liabilities, and if the governments can follow that methodology and disclose that what the methodology they have followed, probably it'll improve the subjectivity of the accrual accounting. Although translating to the accrual accounting for central and states is a long haul. The second point on the equity infusion, whether the SOEs, if they spend on CapEx, does it get aggregated somewhere? Unfortunately, currently there is no process of having a general government accounting for now. So even though CNAG does produce combined expenditures of the states and now for the center also, but other than the states and the center, there is no way of aggregating what the other SOEs are spending. So currently we don't have.
National accounts, they have the public corporate sector capex, right? How good is it? I have no idea, but they do have that.
Just two things to add to that. In our paper, we do take out equity infusions or loans to PSCs and create an estimate for capital spending by public sector enterprises. So our paper does include that. The Department of Public Enterprises has a portal which cumulates capex by at least the central public sector enterprises. Of course, the problem at state level remains. We've had to go through lots and lots of finance account reports to figure out what is their equity infusion in particular PSCs. About free bus rides, sir.
Just one example, that's all.
In our paper, we've highlighted this example of Tamil Nadu including these free bus rides in their subsidy statement, but Punjab also does give free bus rides, but does not include them in its subsidy statement. I think
please, yes. Go ahead, Amar.
Yeah, in this context, again, throwing some ideas. You see the accounts of all the states, except probably one, is being made by the CAG's one wing, which is the Accountant General in charge of accounts. That is the compilation of accounts, final certification of the state government's accounts. Of course, the drawing and disbursing officers under the state government, they classify these items depending on what is their budgetary line item where they have been mentioned. So the misclassification largely happens at that level. Can we reduce this? My view that in this age of technology, and if you really, because PFMS was made, I think, about 10 years ago. So if we are bringing in AI, I think we should be able to minimize this to a large extent. Why it should be easier? Because CAG is the sole authority who is doing it across the country. I don't know why why this uniformity, she talked about this free bus ride, shouldn't have really happened. And then for the central government, until 76, of course, the CAG used to make it, and now the CGA makes it. So there will be two basically authorities who could actually have this uniformity, who could ensure this uniformity. Once they reach that agreement, the DDOs of the concerned state governments could actually be, they would be, there'll be no option for them to misclassify certain subsidies as revenue, as a capital expenditure, which often happens. The CAG does bring out that state finance report for every state and the central government and mention this as that something has happened. But that is an audit of the accounts. It doesn't finally, again, go to rectify the accounts of the previous year. So after 5 years, when you are analyzing those figures, no one is going back to the reports to see what is the auditor's report has said. You still stick to the finance accounts figures and make an analysis, and therefore all of us go wrong. So we have to think about this also as one of the issues that whenever there are accounting errors, non-transparent booking of accounts, a lot of things going into 800 miscellaneous expenditure or miscellaneous receipt instead of going to a proper head of account. If it is reported, the account is not rectified. There is no mechanism actually, because it's a cash accounting system. So the moment an expenditure has been made, it has been expensed off. So you have to address this issue as well. Even if you bring these issues, it will not rectify the accounts. The government of everybody, all accounting authorities have to pay some attention to this, seriously think of this.
Over the years, you would know more than me, almost everything we are talking about as the problems and the data gaps, the CAG has explained, identified, and asked for the correction. So what we're doing now is trying to see, but the CAG has done all this over the years. So then you might ask, if you don't have a PFM law, why doesn't the CAG do more? Now, I learned in my time at the Finance Commission that the CAG does have, in some way, a clear constitutional right to announce a system of reporting, and it's Article 50, I think.
That's right. That's right.
It has the
Article 148. Article
That's
148 clearly states that the form of accounts shall be prescribed by the CAG for both the central government and the state government.
So
this has not really changed much. That's where I think
the right of using that constitutional rule by going to the President of India and asking this be publicized, and that would effectively make it a law. But this would be very complicated, but they have the constitutional right to do it.
So on this making it a law, I remember in 2001, when I was the finance minister at CEA, we were then working on the FRBM, and I had to give evidence to the Standing Committee on Finance, in which Dr. Manmohan Singh was a member as part of the opposition. So this is just by way of saying, so he said things, which I always remember is, look, you're making it into this a law, but if there's a law, then it's justiciable.
Absolutely.
So you're making Parliament subject to the jurisdiction of the courts. And the fact of it is, of course, we've had the FRBM law, it makes no difference, except as a guidance. So my question is that if, I didn't know about this constitutional provision, if this constitutional provision is there and the CAG can do it, then, I mean, what will the law do? Because it becomes justiciable. Who are you going to bring to book?
It can be done by the CAG acting through the President of India. It can be done.
Well, I mean,
it won't be a law. But
no, in some sense, they don't have to ask the President of India. They just do it because they're entitled.
But they have the right to act through the President.
I see.
That's the point. Okay, please. Any other?
I think
Suman, now, please. Good to hear from you.
So Rakesh claimed Anoop as a distinguished fellow as CSEP. I am here claiming Anoop as a distinguished fellow of NITI Aayog. You can see this guy gets around. And I'm here partly because Anoop has been very instrumental and very energetic in putting this issue on NITI's agenda. And we have other staff from NITI here. But But I thought in my remarks, I mean, I have prepared remarks, which I'll get to. I want to first react to what I've heard as an economist. I was once an economist. I don't know if I still am. And then react as the Vice Chairman in NITI Aayog, including on the way forward. So, what was that Tamil song? Why this Kolaveri Di? Something like that. Why are we concerned about this? That's the issue. And I would say there are, and we believe that ultimately, economics is the queen of the social sciences. So the logic of what we are trying to pursue ought in some ways to be based in economics. And there are various reasons why, in general, people are concerned about the fiscal position of governments. And then I'll come to why NITI within that spectrum might be interested to pursue this further, partly related to the setup that Anoop has sketched for this conference, which is we are entering a rather different world where fiscal will be more important. But just speaking as an economist, look, Anoop and I have both worked, well, all three of us, Rakesh has also, we've all worked on Latin America, and the Latins were very focused on the risks to financial stability that emerge from the public finances, because they used to have what Paul Krugman calls type 1 financial crises, which arose out of, as it were, fiscal imbalance, inflation, what have you. And so they became very sensitized to the impact on macro stability arising from the fiscal. And so many of them, and we're in one of these episodes with Argentina right now, after having, as it were, experienced this, decided to get a handle on reporting. Let me that is one issue, which is that what are the dangers for fiscal instability? And we've seen some of this in Sri Lanka, we've seen this in Pakistan. So I think we shouldn't say it can't happen here. It hasn't happened here up till now. So that's one economist reason for thinking that better data will lead to better outcomes. The second is the concern which arose in Britain, I think, in the 80s, of, in effect, crowding out by if you like, the non-market sector of the economy. Broadly speaking, I mean, you've got a competitive sector of, of business which can enter, exit, and then you've got the public sector, including the PSUs, which are not subject to, as it were, the entry and exit constraints. And this was also an issue, I think, that came up at the time of the Soviet Union. János Kornai's articulation of a soft budget constraint. And it is essentially the fact that and I'm going to call it the state sector rather than I should say the public sector is not subject to the same market disciplines as the non-state sector, and could indeed crowd out, as it were, economic activity. And I'm sorry, I see this all the time, that, PSUs, Maharatnas are, busy sort of romancing with each other, putting equity in all of this. And so there could be an economic efficiency dimension for wanting to measure the scope and scale of the public sector correctly. And then there's the issue of how you define the perimeter of the public sector. Again, going back to the Latin American experience, but I guess the work of Alan Blinder also stems from this is, there's a question of not just contingent liabilities, but for example, are the liabilities of the central bank ultimately the liability of a consolidated public sector? Are the which includes the monetary base, and it is for this reason that when the IMF talks about as it were, the stock of reserves, and we've seen this in particularly Argentina, they are basically concerned about the fact that you can have, as it were, and we also saw this at the time of the doom loop. This is not the main thing I should be talking about, but all I'm saying is that behind the reasons for wanting to measure things consistently, and the reason why I guess the IMF came out with standard definitions, is because there are all these dimensions of solvency, but there are also important spillover effects in the global economy, which we will be seeing. Those are micro spillover effects from industrial policy. They're macro spillover effects in terms of the global financial crisis, for example. So just to say, as an economist, that's the larger context in which we need to be thinking about why this is a good thing, quite apart from the fact that we have made, and India sticks to its commitments normally, including climate change, which is why India should, get real if it's made a commitment on having aggregable, if that's the right word, general government fiscal accounts, and made that commitment, a decade ago. Well, we should get on with it, because, it's not particularly respectable that the third largest economy in the world is doing its own thing. We were declared as being systemically important when? At the time of the G20 or soon thereafter? It's 10 years ago. So those are all the economic reasons. But then why is this, an issue that NITI should dabble in? And this is, I think, the line that we are trying to define and navigate, and that is why, and that is where having distinguished panelists who both know, if you like, CAG from the inside, know the Controller General of Accounts from the inside, will be helpful, because we are attempting to work out what is the right way in which NITI should engage with these august. I know the CAG is a constitutional body, but the CGA is a constitutional body, is it? Oh, okay, it comes under, okay. Right. But, all macroeconomists consider the CGA to be the gold standard on, on the expenditure of government. Okay, so we have assumed a mandate, which the first demonstration of which is the fiscal health report that was referred to, and more recently a fiscal together with our joint earlier employer NCAR, because in the way that Anoop has talked about the global imperative, we do think that the fiscal position of states is going to be a limiting factor on their resilience and their development options going ahead. And NITI has been charged by the Honorable Prime Minister, to come up with, if you like, well-grounded, theoretically and factually well-grounded indices as a way of implementing cooperative and competitive federalism. And so we are going to have to move gingerly in this area because, we don't have the disclosure mandate that either CAG or CGA does. But I do think that my soundings of state finance ministers and Anoop's knowledge as including the people here and as a member of the Finance Commission, I think there is an acceptance that development outcomes would be advanced if there was greater consistency and greater transparency. And so where we are right now, literally as of today, we are reviewing the possibility and well, no, I mean, I know from past experience this is not Chatham House rules, but anyway, let me just say that right, exactly. All I wanted to say that we are proceeding on the basis of the momentum that Anoop has imparted to us and the strong support, I should say, of the former finance secretary, now cabinet secretary, to, as it were, to provide a common platform for ultimately our development, as it were, agenda, but with the concurrence and support of the authorities that have responsibility for this, CAG and the CGA, with the idea that we might be able to come out with comparable data. I would make 2 or 3 final points. Look, when a very long time ago I was at university, the left at that time used to argue, and this is really in some ways a response to Anoop's point, used to argue that, if you like, values are embodied in the conceptual framework, or even in the definitions that you use. And so, for example, because at least until now, the IMF was very much a votary of the move from fossil fuels to renewables. I mean, they came up with a definition of fossil fuel subsidies that was at least could be challenged. And so I think, let us not minimize, as it were, the task that's involved in coming up with, in a society like India, which is very welfareist, in coming up with definitions. And whose job that should be, frankly, I don't know. I'm not sure that it's NITI's job. Is it CAG's job? I don't know. But it does seem to me, if we accept Anoop's premise that, and NITI's premise, that this is going to be important for state development going forward, then we've got to find out what is the locus of taking this work forward. So we are taking, not baby steps. Anoop wouldn't allow us to get away with baby steps. We're taking cautious steps I just wanted to say about NITI. So 2 things. One is that, NITI is a continuing presence with strong links to the states, and I hope a reputation for being neutral across states. So that's one reason why NITI could take up this task. But secondly, there is this kind of gap, not a data gap, but an institutional gap, which is that large volumes of data and analysis are accumulated by each finance commission, but finance commissions are self-liquidating. So one thought that we had was that maybe NITI could be a repository of data, quite apart from the definitional issues. So let me, since it's almost 1, and I'm sure there'll be final remarks, let me just, say that it is Anoop's personal energy and the team in CSEP that has produced these, has kept, if you like, the agenda of the 15th Finance Commission on public finance management going. And it's unglamorous, but it's important. I've learned things about the possibilities and capabilities of the CAG. I know that when I was DG NCAR, I would routinely attend meetings of something called the Government Accounts Standards Advisory Group. I get the sense that that hasn't actually resulted in standards that might be the equivalent of a law. Certainly, that's what we were hoping might set us on the path to accrual accounting. With respect to accrual accounting, Honorable Prime Minister has, on several occasions, indicated that consistent with India's civilizational values, mission life, he would like our system of national accounts to, as it were, reflect natural capital and the depletion of natural capital in the way that we account for depreciation of physical capital in the national accounts. And frankly, you can't do that if you don't have an accrual accounts system. So I would just say that both what's happening in the world, what's happening in India, the fact that India is soon to become the third largest economy, all of this makes this a opportune moment, and I would like to salute Anoop and CSEP for giving attention to this, and as in so many other areas, NITI will, I'm sure, continue working with CSEP on this issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Okay, we have a few minutes and people here haven't asked many questions. So, no, you have a chance. You can always jump in. So who wants to at least jump in now? Yes.
Just to get a sense from CGA and CAG, what would be the mechanism of linking with NITI, as it were? Is it a good idea?
Why don't you answer that? Linking? How NITI and CAG, how can they work together on these issues?
Sure, sir. As you are aware, sir, CGA produces the annual financial statements for the government as well as for the monthly budget outturn reports. And it also maintains the structure and the chart of accounts for the center and the states. And as Mr. Amar has said, the CNAG can advise the president, and the CGA can help in structuring the overall system. So I'm sure, sir, CGA can assist NITI Aayog in any fiscal reform.
Your authority derives from the finance ministry?
From the finance ministry, sir.
Okay. The Department of
Expenditure.
Amar, please, let's hear from you.
Yeah. So as I said, I think constitutionally, it's a constitutional provision that the form of accounts in which the central government or the state governments or the union territories would maintain their accounts, and now even the local self-governments, that entire form of accounts, including definitions, including classification criteria, the power is constitutionally given to the CAG.
Right.
So I think, and once it is coming out from one body, then it would tend to become uniform. And I feel that the need or the time has come for it. The kind of work that you have done has to be fed into the CAG and told that this is a time has come that we are going to become the third largest. And these are, I think, some of the fault lines. We need to improve our data. And therefore, there is a time which has come for having a separate form of accounts or an improvised form of accounts. And that the NITI Aayog would actually take the lead in getting this. But ultimately, it has to be prescribed by the CAG constitutionally. And that should then work well. The CGA does only for the government of India, just like 30 other state accountant generals or the CAGs are doing for state governments. Some of the states, bigger states, have volumes of expenditure which 2-3 states could be very high. Because, as you know, 60% of the expenditure happens at the state level and not at the central level. So this entire thing has to come from the CAG. I don't think a revision of the form of accounts has been made.
Awesome.
Either it is being kept for accrual accounting norms to come, and as Dr. Sudesh Bery was talking about the GASAP, that is the Government Accounting Standards Advisory Board, it has come out with, I think, some 4 standards, but nowhere seem to be getting implemented. Serious thought has to be spent on this, and CAG I kind of spurred to take some action on this.
Thank you. Please. You want to go first?
No.
No, please.
Okay, my lens has always been through the city. My name is Jayashree Kurup. I'm a journalist who has been focusing on real estate and city governance. So my lens has been through the local governments. As cities grow and the numbers of cities grow and the volume of finances that go to the cities, as they grow, it's complete chaos at the 3rd level. There is hardly any kind of structure. And if you look at the CAG report that came out on Noida, 8.5 lakh houses not completed, if you read through that, there was a lot of stuff that was not required to be done, or if it was required to be done, there were no checks and balances. When so much money is devolving to the cities, if that is not formalized today, when more and more cities come, roughly about 5,000 cities in the making, and if you don't have a structure of finance accounting,
Yes.
you are going to have more Noidas, many more Noidas.
The point is the risks from all the issues we've talked about are going to grow as the number of spending bodies, levels of government is also growing. You were going to say something. No? Yes.
We were looking at some of the municipal budgets, particularly on the asset side. And most of the municipal assets, the value was shown as 1 rupee. Now, this 1 rupee business has been going on, I must have seen at least for 10 to 20 years, but the 1 rupee value of a municipal asset does not change. What we have been asking the municipalities is to why does it remain 1 rupee? This is the original. The argument was that we cannot really put any value on a road, notwithstanding the fact that they know what it costs to build it. But we would still put in value which in a court of law can be defended for whatever reasons they think proper. Now, I do not know whether Mr. Mathur or Anoop or our guest would explain why is it so that the assets are still 1 rupee, which means that they cannot mortgage it. The issue was whether they can be mortgaged. And they said, look, the value is 1 rupee. What do we do? It was a substitute for municipal bond. Our argument was that why would you not mortgage some of your assets and raise money and use them for your capital loss or O&M? But he said, look, this is our.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is.
Thanks, Suman. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I am Monica from the IMF India office. So my question would be, in light of the constrained fiscal space in today's scenario, how should India prioritize between public investment and social sector spending in upcoming years? So I would like to get a brief, your views on the same. Thank you so much.
Anyone else?
I just want to add a point. So while I agree on the importance of having a PFM law and also in the long term moving from a cash-based accounting to an accrual-based accounting, but can we, as you mentioned, take baby steps and make use of a very sound accounting system that CGA along with CAG already has in place? In fact, the Office of CGA updates a list of major and minor hits on an ongoing basis. As Dr. Amar also said, that's the basis for accounting for the states until minor hit is consistent across the central and the state governments. Below that, it varies from state to state. Now, I've worked as consulted with finance departments in a number of states with CG and CNAG as well. One of the major things that we find, states' finance departments do not have clarity whether to classify a DBT scheme as a subsidy or a grant in aid. There is absolute lack of clarity. The CAG AG office, the Accountant General office, does have entry and exit conferences every year with finance departments wherein discrepancies around accounting or misclassification is highlighted. But there is a capacity gap in the finance departments of state governments. But I believe there is still a room to take those incremental steps to maybe till the time we have a PFM law or till the time we move to an accrual-based accounting, can we not update minor hits and along with standardization of definitions, include provisions for recording subsidy, grant and aid till a minor head level so that it becomes standardized across the state governments and government of India. And then maybe kind of take it forward when the PFM law comes in. So yeah, I mean, just 2 cents in terms of, Dr. Amir, I mean, if you can have, views from you as well, that would be great.
Okay, yes, please.
About 20 years back, when we started using e-government in the country, one of the major challenges was this whole thing about cash-based accounting. And because of, so when e-governance project started about 25 years back, one of the major challenges, especially in terms of property tax, was cash-based accounting. And in some of the places, people did agree that, yes, if we move to accrual-based accounting, that will be much better to implement e-governance. My question is, at that point of time, of course, it was because of technology taken, but now can we look at the other way in terms of using technology itself to improve, as Dr. Patnaik just mentioned?
Absolutely. Okay, it's also past 1 o'clock, so I'm not sure we should continue for too long more. Do you want to say a few things before we end?
Your question. So as Dr. Mohan had also mentioned in his speech that it's a trade-off between long-term public investments and short-term welfare gains. So I think what we argue for is that with better accounting, you can control the cost and the amount of money you splurge on these schemes. So maybe some saving can come from there. But yes, we have not researched much in this direction. It is an important macroeconomic topic. So yes, must be taken into consideration.
So Amar, do you want to say something more before we end this?
No, I think I entirely agree with somebody who was suggesting that, with the existing system, there are a lot of scope and room for improvement, acceptance, adoption, changes. The requirement is only the change in the mindset and someone to take the initiative. So that is one I agree entirely. The second point is now, every state government have the power to open various object heads of accounts. Has a time come to also standardize that? Now, I think some of these issues will have to be, someone has to, in fact, CSEP could actually take up this discussion and invite CAG also and CGA people, because I think the next level of reforms in the accounting formats in line with the global standards has not yet happened. The GASAB has only been looking at shifting towards an accrual-based accounting system. Even if you move to an accrual-based accounting system, there are standards which have to be taken up, which have to be implemented. They're quite difficult going to be across the board. On the municipal side, someone made this mention, every finance commission, every political party says that, money is actually, more money should flow to the third tier. It's fine. Everyone also recognizes the lack of capacity there. And for successive finance commissions, the money has been given to increase that capacity. Now is the time to actually passionately look at this as to why it has not happened. So we have to do some out-of-box thinking as to whether the accounting at the municipal levels would be handled by somebody who is professionally able to handle this. Will it be a group of retired CGA, CAG, it's under an authority structure, under a kind of a legal structure, because otherwise it is not happening, whereas their volume of expenditure is only increasing. This is something, these are reforms required.
You say if you will.
Just two points. One is whether we can classify subsidies at a minor ed level. Essentially, the current structure says minor ed is for a program. So that will be a challenge. As I had suggested, actually, we should have a comprehensive uniform chart of accounts which goes down to the last economic level across the union and states, standardizing, giving sufficient leeway to the states to create their own. But it should be standardized. So that could be the solution. And somebody suggested, can we use technology for transitioning to accrual or something like that? Accrual is much more than the technology. Technology can help in recording, but transitioning to accrual requires a big policy decision. It's a long haul. It's not an easy process for any government. So that's a policy decision the government has to take. The technology can support.
Okay, let me just say one final point, and you can end the discussion. So India's had this problem with data gaps for a long time. But let me make one point. What we're seeing today in the world is that this is a global problem. And what recent research has found is there are data gaps in almost all countries, including advanced countries in the US and Germany and others. Now, the issue is, why has this happened? So one reason, of course, is if this happens is because the governments prefer it that way. But the other reason is more objective. The other reason is that over the last 20 years, the nature of borrowers and lenders and borrowing instruments and institutions has dramatically changed. So today, who is a borrower, who is a lender, what is the instrument,
Hello?
who is liable, this has changed over the last 20 years. Now, most countries, unlike India, have had laws like the PFM law. India has not. But now what I want to say is almost all countries are realizing there is now a need to change their own laws on the issue of public disclosure of public debt and the transactions, because the instruments have changed. In many cases, countries are not reporting certain transactions and certain information on debt and financing is because their own law, legal structure, does not require them to do it. So now there needs to be a rehaul of the laws behind public finance data in many countries. And this is a process that's probably going to be underway now. So it's not just in India, it's across the world.
Thank you very much, Anoop. But let me first
Yes,
thank our colleagues,
Also important.
Radha and Shruti, for the clarity of their presentation, how lucid it was and how brief it was actually on a complex subject. So the future of India is in good hands.
There you are.
हम लोग तो हो गए अब. Let me also thank Mr. Patnaik and Mr. Mathur for spending the time.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I've learned, having been part of the government of India, inside in Reserve Bank and in various issues outside, is that the depth of knowledge in the government system is often underestimated. And I think what Mr. Patnaik and Mr. Mathur displayed is how well many things are known and how expert many of our senior civil servants are in their different professional capacities, and how this can be taken forward. I think the great idea that people like yourselves should now actually make it your mission to go and help the municipal corporations to increase their expertise. I mean that very seriously, actually, because one of the things that I do want to make that last comment was one of the last comments was capacity in municipal corporations, at local government level. I think Mr. Patnaik, was it you who also talked about capacity in finance departments in state governments? Having been in the Ministry of Finance, although it was 20 years ago, this huge issue with the capacity in central government also, the Finance Ministry, etc. And Reserve Bank, by the way. So this is general theme I was saying that this issue keeps coming up of state capacity, enhancement of state capacity.
Yeah.
And many, that to the extent, another thing I learned today is that we have the mechanisms, right, within the current constitutional provisions to do what you have suggested
Right.
without a new law.
We
in a
do
sense,
have it, yeah.
right? And the issue to my mind is state capacity, actually. It can be done with enhancement. And what I always mention now is, look, we're producing 10 million graduates a year now. Now, we know the varied quality, but even if, say, 10% are good, that's a lot, so that there's no shortage of people now to do these things. Let me conclude by just thanking Anoop. And despite my initial remarks about him, I think he displayed what I've known him for 40 years now. Also, that is since he was born 40 years ago. By his own admission.
41 now.
41. That his clarity of thought is one of his characteristics, actually. And I think that was displayed both in the work as well as in his remarks. Second is one of the things he's always done in the IMF, working on different countries, is speaking truth to power. You cannot constrain him. And I think the 15th Finance Commission learned that to their cost. So thank you very much for doing this with CSEP and for captaining this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all.